Skeletons of the Marital Closet by Tang. Chapter 1801. Did Orem insist on Ivy as the female lead, as he was the investor and had a say? Paul had to agree. However, Gale remembered Orem saying it was Ivy's acting that impressed Paul, right? Orem noticed Gale's confusion and explained, "I recommended Ivy to Paul. Initially he was torn between several well-known actresses. After meeting Ivy through me, he made the decision." Paul laughed heartily. Thanks to Mr. Lefting, not only does Mr. Lefting have a strong influence in the business world, but his eye for casting is also exceptional. Unnoticed by anyone, Paul discreetly rubbed his hands under the table. His palms were sweating. The investment in this movie was enormous. After initial budgeting, it was found he would require an investment of at least $100 million. Although Paul was famous, that was no small sum. At that cost base, it would be harder to make a profit. Why take such a risk when there were plenty of high-return investment projects awaiting investors? Businessmen pursued profits. They were not doing charity. Initially, Paul approached many company CEOs for investments and sponsorships, but few agreed. They talked well, but there was no action. Then, Orem appeared. Orem claimed he would not interfere, but Paul still wanted to see for himself. A financier was a financier, after all. If one got upset and withdrew investment, Paul would be in deep trouble. Gale nodded. "So, that's how it is, Paul. Ivy indeed has both looks and acting skills, plus she's an award-winning actress. Choosing her is definitely not wrong." Paul agreed. "With Mr. Lefting and Mrs. Wood's strong recommendations, I believe this movie of mine will shine brightly." Orem glanced at Paul indifferently. Although there was a hint of dissatisfaction in his eyes, Paul's response was quick, managing to smooth things over. "Mrs. Wood, please sit." Paul pulled out a chair. "What would you like to drink?" Gale declined. "No thanks, I just came to see you, the youngest renowned director in the film industry. Now that I've met you, I should leave." Her phone in her bag kept vibrating. Those were messages from Shawn. Without looking, Gale knew he was urging her to come home. People say when a couple gets married, men lose their freedom. Why was it that she was the one without freedom? She missed the times when she could come and go as she pleased. "You guys carry on. I don't understand acting or investment, so I won't disturb you," Gale said. Paul seemed anxious. "How can you leave right after arriving? You haven't even had a sip of water." "Mrs. Wood, please, have a seat." "I'll only hinder your discussion here." "Not at all, we're just chatting casually." Paul tried hard to keep Gale, almost resorting to physically restraining her to her seat. If not for Gale's status, he would really do it. Orem remained silent, his eyes slightly lowered, his expression as calm as ever, making it hard to tell what he was thinking. "I need to go home. The kids are waiting for me." Gale smiled at Ivy. "Please go on without me. I have high hopes for this film. With Mr. Lefting's investment, Paul's direction, and you as the female lead, it's bound to be a hit. As long as the male lead's acting and looks were up to par, it would be a surefire success. They may even win awards. By then, she would have the publicity department ramp up advertising to elevate Ivy's fame to an even higher level." Chapter 1802. This would also be Ivy's first movie after leaving her talent agency and joining the Wood Group. In a way, it was a debut. By then, Ivy's position in the entertainment industry would look completely stable. She had the talent, the projects, and the looks. "I'll walk you out." Ivy took Gale's hand. "I meant to treat you to dinner to thank you, but I ended up neglecting you." "It's okay, you're busy." Her phone buzzed in her bag several times again. Gale knew if she did reply to Shawn's messages now, he would definitely come looking for her. Before leaving, Gale suddenly thought of something. She would be leaving Ivy with two men. Would it be inappropriate? She was unsure about Paul's character as she had just met him. However, she could trust Orem. After some thought, Gale turned to Orem. "Before we go, I'll leave Ivy in your care." Having known each other for years, Orem would surely understand what she meant. She was entrusting him to take care of Ivy. "Don't worry, after our chat, I'll safely escort her home. She's now the female lead in the movie I'm investing in. She is very precious, and I can't afford any mistakes," Orem replied. With Orem's assurance, Gale felt completely at ease. However, Ivy's heart was beating rapidly. Since she met Orem, he had always been so courteous, gentlemanly, and dignified, like a well-bred aristocrat. Ivy understood Gale's concerns. She worried that Ivy might encounter the unspoken rules. Women always understood each other. Ivy said softly, "Gale, I've met Orem and Paul before. Nothing will happen." Gale nodded. Orem suddenly said, "Gale, my driver is at the restaurant entrance. How about I have him take you back to Temperley Hall?" As he spoke, Orem stood up. For some reason, his body suddenly swayed violently, as if he had no strength and was about to fall forward. Even the table in front of him shook violently, and the dishes clattered loudly. "Hey, Orem!" Paul saw this and hurriedly reached out to support him. "Be careful, what's wrong with you?" Orem leaned on the table, barely steadying himself, and waved his hand. "It's nothing, maybe I stood up too quickly and felt a bit dizzy." He shook his head. "What's wrong? Have you overworked yourself? Haven't rested well?" Gale, seeing this scene, asked with concern. Orem smiled. "Maybe." Gale was about to say something when suddenly she felt her vision darken. A wave of weakness swept over her entire body. Her head felt dizzy, and her vision began to blur. What was happening? Gale pressed her temples, closing and opening her eyes, but the blurriness persisted. She also felt unsteady, swaying on her feet. "Ivy, I'm..." Gale tried to keep her eyes on Ivy in front of her. However, to her surprise, Ivy's body also shook. She took a few steps back and was leaning against the wall, her eyes half closed. An ominous feeling surged from the depths of Gale's heart. She felt panicked. Chapter 1803. Why did Ivy also experience the same situation as her? Orem too! Gale suddenly turned her head and looked toward Orem's direction. He had slumped back into his chair, unconscious, with his eyes closed. Orem was the first to experience dizziness. Then it was her, followed by Ivy. What on earth happened? Shawn's admonition echoed in Gale's mind. "Gale, I'm worried that person will come after you next." Could it be that she was targeted so quickly? How did she get targeted? She did not eat anything random, nor did she interact with strangers. The person behind this was terrifying, and their methods were too cunning. She was completely defenseless. Gale only had one thought in her mind: to get out. She needed to leave this private room as soon as possible. The door was right in front of her. Gale reached for the door handle, but she had no strength left. She could not even open the door. "What's happening to you guys?" Paul's voice rang out. Orem? Mrs. Wood? And Ivy, this?" Gale's body leaned against the door, slowly sliding down. She struggled with the last bit of consciousness, trying hard to say, "Paul, call the police." After saying this, Gale's vision went completely black. She closed her eyes and curled up in the corner behind the door, motionless. The entire process took less than 2 minutes. Mrs. Wood. Paul, the only sober person in the room, quickly rushed over and squatted beside Gale. Wake up, can you hear me, Mrs. Wood?" He kept shaking Gale's body, patting her cheeks, but Gale still showed no response. "Ivy?" Paul looked at Ivy again. "Wake up. What's wrong with you guys? Can you hear me?" Paul's voice was filled with anxiety and worry. He kept calling out to Gale and Ivy, trying to wake them up. However, he never left the private room, never sought help, and never called the police as instructed by Gale. Paul kept calling out to Gale and Ivy repeatedly, trying to wake them up. After confirming that Gale and Ivy had truly lost consciousness, he breathed a sigh of relief. A strange smile appeared on his face. Then, Paul stood up and returned to the dining table. "Orem, it's done," he said softly. As soon as he finished speaking, Orem, who had been lying on the table just now, slowly opened his eyes and sat up straight. Orem's gaze was clear, and there were no traces of his previous dizziness. Did I do all right? I didn't reveal anything suspicious during the whole process, did I?" Paul asked. Orem glanced at him. "It's passable. It was just about done, but it was not necessarily perfect. There was no other choice. Paul had leverage over Orem, making him the best candidate for the job. Orem had to let him handle it. Other people would not be so easy to control." "Hey! Then," Paul chuckled dryly. He glanced at Ivy, full of greed. Female celebrities in the entertainment industry were all beautiful and sexy. Men drooled over them. Chapter 1804. Paul had slept with many female celebrities, but so it was quite difficult to get someone as reserved and dignified as Ivy into bed. He did not have the patience to pursue her genuinely, to date her, so he can only resort to this method. Anyway, it was just a fun night. In the entertainment industry, everyone's here for a good time. Coincidentally, Orem has the same idea. So, they plotted to make a move. Take her away. I'll leave Ivy to you. Orem waved his hand. Thank you, Orem. But, be gentle. She still has to star in this movie, understand? Orem reminded. Crystal clear. I know my limits. With Orem's permission, Paul happily headed toward Ivy. He would have fun that night. He was ecstatic. The moment he laid eyes on Ivy, he knew he had never been with a woman like her before. Finally, she was in his hands. Paul supported Ivy as they left the private room. Orem walked over to Gale, knelt down on one knee, lifted her hand, and gently slid his fingertips across her cheek. Gale, do you know what I've become for you? How much I've done to get you, he said. I barely recognize myself now. Things I used to disdain, look down upon, or even detest, I'm now doing with my own hands. Through this process, I slowly understand Natalie's mindset. Why did she refuse to turn back and admit her mistakes? Why would she rather die than live a life of compromise? Since Natalie's death, Orem suddenly felt like he had nothing. Everything he had before was just an illusion. Shawn had everything that he truly wanted. Don't hate me, Gale, don't, I love you. Orem looked at her peaceful sleeping face. I won't hurt you, I just want to have you. The beloved woman was right in front of him, allowing him to toy with her. It made him feel hot and bothered. Orem's hand slid downward, through her nape and waist, intending to lift her up. A cell phone rang from a lady's bag nearby. Orem glanced at it. At this time, the caller should be Shawn. He snorted coldly, took out the phone, and looked at it for a few moments. All messages from Shawn, texts, missed calls. The ringtone kept ringing. Orem stuffed the phone back into the bag, threw it onto a chair beside the dining table, then picked Gale up and left the private room in large strides. Before leaving, he glanced at the position of the surveillance cameras, his eyes narrowing. Whatever Shawn could think of, he had already thought of. Orem would not leave any evidence behind. He was also a prominent figure in Sea City, his methods and schemes no less than Shawn's. This was the first time Orem began to arrange a plan like this. He was more cautious and careful than usual. The cell phone continued to ring inside the private room, but no one would answer it. Back home in the living room, Shawn sat on the sofa, legs crossed, his expression growing darker. The servants dared not make a sound, afraid of disturbing him and provoking his wrath. Hello, you've reached. The cold mechanical phone operator sounded. He angrily threw the phone aside and pressed hard on his temples. Nicole jumped in fright. Daddy? Chapter 1805. Shawn's heart sank. He forgot that his 2 children were right beside him. Shawn said with a faint smile, trying to ease the tension. It was an accident. Nicole, don't be afraid. Oh, I thought you were throwing a tantrum and tossing your phone, Joshua teased. He denied it. Joshua glanced at Shawn. Are you calling Mommy? Shawn did not answer. Is she out drinking with Godmother again? You've been left behind, only able to stay home and keep my sister and me company? Tesk, Dad, you... Joshua guessed. Shut up. I'll say what I want. You should give Mommy some freedom. She's not meeting up with a man, why are you checking up on her? Joshua said. Shawn snorted. A man? Meeting up? She wouldn't even think about it. Calm down. She'll be back in an hour, Joshua said. An hour? Shawn could not even wait a minute more. He did not want his emotions to affect the 2 children, so he got up and left the villa. The night was cool. Autumn had arrived, and the night breeze carried a chill. Shawn gazed at the night sky. Stars scattered across the sky, emitting a faint glow. There was always one that belonged to him and Gale. After a while, Shawn became increasingly restless. If he had known, he would have gone with Gale to meet Ivy tonight. Gale might not have checked her phone or answered his calls, but Ivy would not dare ignore his calls. With this thought, Shawn quickly dialed Ivy's number. Beep. Still, no one answered. Shawn's face completely darkened. Something was wrong. How could he not contact both Gale and Ivy? Could it be? Shawn immediately dialed another number and asked directly, "Where is Aurum?" The bodyguard reported, "Aurum hasn't left home since he returned this afternoon. We've been lurking outside the Lefting house and we haven't seen any movements. Are there no vehicles coming in or out of the main or side gates?" A car did leave, but it was the Lefting family's daily use vehicle, a very ordinary car. "Aurum usually doesn't ride in that car, let alone drive it, Mr. Wood." Shawn frowned. This was no good. Aurum could have been in that car. The more Shawn thought about it, the more flustered he became. His chest heaved continuously, his expression serious. "Go to the Lefting house immediately. I don't care what method you use, but check if Aurum is at home or not," Shawn ordered. "Yes, Mr. Wood." Without any hesitation, Shawn went straight to the garage. He had to go to the restaurant immediately. He needed to see Gale in person, or he would not be able to calm down. He accelerated on the gears and left. Nicole looked up and blinked at the window. "Did Daddy go out for a drive?" Chapter 1806. "Yeah, he just can't sit still. Weird how men can't be uneasy even in their 30s, Joshua replied. He hummed a song, continuing to build his Lego. The car sped down the road. Midway through the journey, Shawn received a call from his bodyguard. "Speak!" The bodyguard said in a panic, "Mr. Wood, Aurum is not at home. I've sneaked into the master bedroom, study, and living room, and checked them all. Damn it!" Shawn pressed on the accelerator even harder. His sports car sped up even more. Thoughts raced through his mind, and he began speculating. Aurum was not at his house, but he had slipped away from the house using the daily car without his people noticing, which meant Shawn guessed that Aurum had already known about Shawn's spies observing him. If neither Gale nor Ivy answered their phones, something must truly be wrong. "Gale, hold on, wait for me," he thought. His sports car stopped at the restaurant entrance. Before the doorman could approach, Shawn had already stepped out of the car. He marched straight into the restaurant. The manager hurriedly approached him. "Hello?" "Ah." Shawn grabbed the manager's collar. "Where is my wife?" "Your wife?" "Surveillance. Get the surveillance feed immediately." He was like a raging lion, his face darkened like a time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. He could not afford any delays. Every minute he wasted was an additional minute where Gale was in danger. Shawn knew that Aurum had taken Gale. If Gale falls into Aurum's hands, she would not be in any life-threatening danger, but what would Aurum do to her? The answer was so clear. He was worried Aurum might use her. If Aurum succeeded this time, Shawn knew Gale was being manipulated. She was the victim. He could convince himself not to care, but what about Gale herself? She would feel she had been tainted. Shawn was shaking all over, unable to restrain his trembling. He was filled with anger. If Aurum dared to touch Gale. If Aurum dared, Shawn would make him pay a painful price, worse than death. The restaurant was very cooperative, quickly pulling up the surveillance footage and finding the table number where Gale and Ivy were dining. "Mr. Wood, according to the surveillance and the bill, after your wife finished her meal and paid the bill, she did not leave the restaurant." "She's still here," the manager said, trembling. "Then where is she?" The manager was also at a loss. "I don't know." Shawn pushed him away, staring intently at the computer screen. In the surveillance, Gale, Ivy and Aurum, each holding a teacup, seemed to be chatting casually. The atmosphere looked very relaxed and natural. Then the three of them left together. That was the problem. The surveillance stopped here, turning into a blur of snowflakes. Nothing could be seen anymore. "What's going on?" Shawn clenched his fists. "Where's the footage?" It seems to be broken. We can't see anything more. I've contacted the engineer to fix it, but at this hour, I'm afraid." The manager trembled. Before he could finish his sentence, Shawn punched the wall. "Search for her. Search the entire restaurant now," he said coldly. Chapter 1807. Without surveillance, it was like being blind. They had no idea what had happened and where to start their search. Still, it did not affect Shawn's determination to find Gale. Oh, what a clever move by Aurum. Aurum had evaded the spies and created an illusion that he was always at home, causing Shawn to let his guard down, when in reality, Aurum had already arrived at the restaurant. Orem must have received information in advance that Ivy and Gale would be dining here tonight. Then, he pretended to run into them casually, chatted for a while, and then found some excuse to make Ivy and Gale leave with him. Then, the surveillance ended. No one knew where they went, what they were doing, who they met, or what happened. Shawn closed his eyes and took a deep breath. At this moment he wanted to murder Orem. He did not care about the burden of proof or whatever friendship that had existed between Gale and him. Orem was now considered an extremely dangerous presence, and he should be ruthless. He wanted to eliminate all future trouble. Shawn's bodyguards arrived quickly. They were well trained and methodical. The restaurant was surrounded and cleared out. Soon, the bodyguards found Gale's bag in one of the private rooms. "Mr. Wood, this is Mom's belongings." He pushed through the crowd, walked in, and looked at the bag. It was hers, no doubt about it. Everything inside was intact, including her phone, which displayed his unread messages and missed calls. However, where was everyone? Gale? Orem? Ivy? Had they disappeared out of thin air? Shawn clenched the bag, veins bulging on the back of his hand, and ordered, "Launch a citywide search. There'll be a hefty reward for anyone who finds my wife." Fear, worry, and helplessness filled his heart. However, the more chaotic it was, the more he could not lose his composure. He could not fall into pieces now. Gale was still waiting for him to rescue her. Whatever happened, whatever Orem did to Gale, he still loved her. She was still his Mrs. Wood. Shawn's eyes went dark. The night was getting darker. Despite the lively and bustling atmosphere of Sea City, after midnight, the streets became increasingly empty, with few pedestrians and even fewer vehicles. Shawn leaned against the car door, smoking one cigarette after another. Cigarette butts piled up at his feet. He did not know where Gale was now, but what he could do was mobilize all his people to search. They were running out of time. Orem and Gale were in a cheap-looking small motel in a secluded alley. It was next to an old residential area, dirty and messy, with broken things everywhere. The air carried a musty smell. In a corner room, Orem gently placed Gale on the bed. She was so beautiful and pure. She made the humble motel room look more upscale. This was a place that someone of Orem's status would never set foot in their entire life. However, he had to be here. "I'm sorry to inconvenience you temporarily, Gale. I also want our first time to leave a perfect impression on you. In the future. I'll make it up to you," Orem said. The soundproofing of the room was extremely poor. Chapter 1808. Occasionally, footsteps outside were clearly audible. Even a slight cough or a few words spoken were incredibly distinct. He could hear heavy, labored breathing from the adjacent room. That was Paul. Orem smirked, chuckling softly. Paul seemed quite impatient. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he gazed at the woman he loved. He mocked Paul, but in reality, he could hardly contain himself. He had known Gale for so many years, yet he had never even properly held her hand. Whenever she appeared before him, she exuded purity, cleanliness, and beauty, giving him an unattainable feeling. However, Orem knew that in places he could not see, at times he did not know about, she and Shawn had done things. Only Shawn had seen her shy yet bold, sexy yet innocent side. No matter, he was about to have her. Orem took a deep breath and reached for the zipper of her dress. With just a gentle pull, her graceful curves would be fully revealed to him. Perhaps because he was too excited, Orem's hand trembled slightly, and he tried several times to pull the zipper down. He had never touched a woman. He only had dated Natalie, an unmarried fiancée. He always wanted to wait for their wedding night, not wanting to touch her beforehand. At this moment, Orem's inner joy was indescribable. Orem was very anxious. He did not know what to do first. Should he take off her dress, or kiss her? What should he do first? Gale lay quietly with her eyes closed, allowing him to manipulate her. Orem lowered his head, his breath trembling, slowly approaching her lips. "Shawn." At that moment Gale suddenly whimpered. Orem's body stiffened, looking at her. He was scared to move, thinking she had woken up. He was afraid of being caught, so he did not put that much medicine into her tea. Could it be that it had failed? After several seconds, Gale still had her eyes closed. Orem breathed a sigh of relief. "Shawn, stop messing around," Gale murmured unconsciously. Orem's face changed abruptly. He immediately understood that Shawn often treated her like this in her mind, so she thought he was Shawn. I want to sleep, so tired. I need to rest, let me go, Gale continued. Don't do this every night. I'm still having my period, did you forget? Take precautions. I haven't planned for a third child yet. Every word Gale uttered felt like a sharp blade piercing Orm's heart. He could even imagine how she lay in Shawn's arms in their bedroom. Orm clenched his fist tightly. Sleep, sleep. Orm suddenly lost all interest in her. Chapter 1809. He leaned over Gale's body, tense all over, staring fixedly at her sleeping face. Her lips moved, but she was calling out another man's name. Shawn. Orm's eyes flashed with malice as he lifted Gale's chin with his hand. Don't think about him anymore, Gale. When you wake up tomorrow and see the person lying next to you is me. How will you ever return to Shawn's side? He said. Clearly my love for you is no less than Shawn's. I knew you before him, we made a marriage pact over 20 years ago. Why does he get you in the end? Even after many years, when we first met again, you gave me a sense of familiarity. I unconditionally helped you and accompanied you through countless difficulties. Gale, can you truly ignore my feelings and thoughts? After tonight, Gale, you are mine, and from now on to Shawn you are tainted. Even if he was uninterested, Orm still intended to possess her tonight. He had schemed for so long to get to this point. Now was not the time to let her go. When else would he have the chance? Orm's grip was strong, and even in her unconscious state, Gale winced in pain. His hand no longer trembled as it reached the zipper, forcefully pulling it down, and the dress slid off to the ground. Orm's gaze darkened. Open up, open up. At that moment he heard voices coming from the lobby. It sounded like there were several people. Orm could care about that much. Even if the sky fell, he had to have Gale now. As his lips were about to touch hers, he heard the voices below saying, "Open up, or I'll kick it down." Coming. The boss opened the door, asking, "What's the matter? Why so urgent? We run a small business here. We even have a business license. It's legal. It's the middle of the night. How do you expect people to sleep here? Don't disturb my customers. Looking for someone. Which rooms are occupied?" Orm stopped moving. Shawn's men had found their way here so quickly? Orm quickly walked to the window, lifted a corner of the curtain, and looked downstairs. The streetlights were dim, but he could make out several figures dressed in black clothes, wearing earpieces. It was obvious that they were Shawn's bodyguards. Shawn's men were all rigorously trained. Orm did dare to peek for too long, afraid of being noticed by them. Orm let go of the curtain, his brow furrowed. He wondered what he should do now, as he had expected this group of people to arrive so quickly. Orm looked at Gale on the bed. He was running out of time with her. Soon the sound of footsteps came from the stairs, and the old flooring of the building creaked and groaned. They were coming up, and it sounded like they would search each room one by one. The bodyguards were well trained, with 2 people per group. They would bust open the doors and guard the front door, preventing anyone from escaping. In this situation, not even a fly could get out. With a bang, the door next door was kicked open. Paul's voice sounded, "Hey, who are you? How dare you barge into my room? Get out." Paul was quite scared, not expecting someone to suddenly barge in. What was going on? Could there have been an accident? Did Orm arrange everything? Paul, lying naked on the bed, looked at the bodyguards at the door. Chapter 1810. He still had a bit of conscience left in him. He had pulled the blanket over Ivy's body. However, the bodyguards were sharp-eyed, and one of them recognized her right away. "Isn't that Ivy?" The others quickly gathered around. "That's her! Notify Mr. Wood immediately," since Mrs. Wood and Ivy disappeared together. Finding Ivy meant that Mrs. Wood must be nearby, or even in this small hotel. However, seeing Ivy's snowy shoulders and the bruises on her neck, a sense of foreboding flashed through the bodyguards' hearts. What state would Mrs. Wood be after seeing that? The bodyguards exchanged glances, not daring to continue thinking further. If they barged into another room and saw Mrs. Wood like this, Mr. Wood would probably gouge their eyes out. The lead captain picked up the walkie-talkie, saying sternly, "Stop all searches. Stand guard at each room's door. No one is allowed in or out. Wait for Mr. Wood to arrive. Yes, Captain. The once chaotic and noisy small hotel was silent. Paul looked at the group of people, and also felt that something was amiss. However, he was not afraid. All he did was sleep with Ivy. He could say it was consensual, and that Ivy seduced him. In the entertainment industry, affairs between actresses and directors were common. Who would sympathize with Ivy? No one would believe she was innocent. As for Mrs. Wood, his thoughts trailed off. Paul started to worry about Orem because he was his benefactor. His movie still needed to start shooting smoothly. This movie was a big investment and production. Paul was not sure about its success. If he performed as expected, there would be no problem reaching their financial targets at the box office. Still, with an exorbitant investment of $100 million, he would not find any backers willing to invest in such expensive movies if he had failed. Orem had suddenly appeared, and was willing to support him unconditionally. This movie was significant to Paul. If it succeeded, Paul's status and influence would reach higher levels, and he would not have to worry about funding for the rest of his life. 10 minutes later, Shawn appeared. He had been waiting in the city center for news so that it would be convenient for him to get anywhere. Once there was news, he could rush there in the shortest time. Mr. Wood, we found Ivy, the captain reported. Where is she? The captain hesitated. Shawn's expression turned cold. Speak! The captain's voice was low. She's in a room with a man, and it seems they just finished. Ivy has been sleeping the whole time, and we did not want to wake her. Shawn did not say anything further, but everyone could feel his hostility. This was a sign of Shawn's rage. I immediately ordered the search to stop, Mr. Wood. The hotel has been sealed off from top to bottom, and no one is allowed in or out. We thought Mrs. Wood might also be here, so we'll wait for you to conduct the search personally, the captain said. Shawn closed his eyes. His hands trembled, unable to control the shaking. He even wanted to clench his fists, but he had no strength. Ivy and a man. So, Gale? And Orem. All right. He spat through his teeth. He began his ascent up the stairs. All he had in his mind was finding Gale.